Good morning and welcome to What is True. Normally on Sunday mornings we're talking about the Word of God, studying what God teaches in the Bible. We're departing from that this morning and for the next few sessions looking at scientific evidence, which also tells us about God and His work. But there are a great many people in this world who've been convinced that the Bible is not God's Word by science. And I think we need to be able to look at science and see that that leads us to God rather than away from God. Remember in 1 Peter chapter 3, we're told to be ready, always prepared to make a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. Today, in order to defend the truth, we need to be able to meet all of the arguments coming our way from the Bible, sometimes in error, sometimes evidence from science that tells us, or tries to tell us, that the Bible isn't true. Paul is meeting that kind of argument and showing the power of evidence from design in the universe in Romans chapter 1, which is powerful evidence against those who say there is no God or that the Bible is not the Word of God. He said, since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, what are the invisible attributes? His eternal power, His divine nature, have been clearly seen. And how do you see those eternal attributes? It's seen through what has been made, and it's so obvious, that is, from design in nature or in the world, in creation. So obvious that they're without excuse when they deny that evidence. We're going to be talking about what's often called creation science, but I think we need to defend against the misrepresentations regarding creation science. If you form your opinion of creation science from what the media tells you, you probably got the wrong idea. What is creation science is going to be our theme this morning, and then we'll proceed in subsequent lessons looking at more powerful evidence. But to give an idea of the misrepresentation of this concept, notice the statement by the American Institute of Biological Science. Because creationism is based almost solely on religious dogma stemming from faith, and they're talking here about blind faith, not the kind of faith that we talked about in some lessons earlier, rather than demonstrable facts. Religious dogma, blind faith, not demonstrable facts. And so because of its blind faith, that doesn't lend itself to the scientific process. Well, of course, I would agree with that conclusion, but deny that that's what I hold and what Christians should. To get an idea of what creation science really is, let's notice a statement by two Supreme Court justices, fairly recently deceased, Justice Scalia, Justice Rehnquist. They were discussing this very issue, what is creation science? 53 scientists testified, and therefore they said we have no basis on the record to conclude that creation science be anything other than a collection of scientific data supporting the theory that life abruptly appeared on the earth. It is scientific data, not religious dogma. But how do you look at the scientific data and distinguish between creation and evolution? Well, I think we do that normally and regularly. If it's not leading to faith in God, they're ready to follow such conclusions. We look, for example, at this rock. That's a demonstrable fact. How do you think that originated? I think probably time and chance is a good explanation for that. But then we look at another rock, basically the same material, but it's shaped differently. How do you think that originated? Time and chance? I don't think so. There's too much design necessarily implied, and we don't mind that as long as it's leading to a designer that we're comfortable with. But we can discern intelligent design strictly from the empirical evidence, from the demonstrable facts that they say we don't look at falsely. This is not a religious conclusion, but looking at empirical evidence. Now, let's look at another drawing and think about, again, origins. Did that happen as a result of the ink bottle turning over and producing this fly with ants on its wings? I don't think anybody would buy that. That was designed by intelligence. And that's all right because it's an intelligence that we accept. But look at another similar picture, a real picture of a real fly with ants on its wings. This is the way it grows. It's from the Middle East, this one from the Arab Emirate Republic. Here the peacock fly is seen, and when it wiggles its wings, it makes the ants look like they're moving and intimidates the predators. It has the correct number of legs, the correct number of antennae, differentiated head and tail and thorax, the tapered abdomen. This is perfect. In fact, that's the way it was described in scientific literature. They're perfect. Now, did that happen by time and chance or by created design? We look at the arrowhead, yes, that's created design, but we look at this, which contains a great deal more information and design, and we're reluctant to go there because we don't like where it leads, or some are. Look at another example of lines that parallel the beach, the waves, and we see them appear and disappear as the waves, the tide come in and out. That shows some order, but is that natural or was that designed? I think most of us would conclude that's natural. You go a little further and you see this, John loves Mary there on the beach. And, you know, I don't think the waves did that. I think there was intelligence there. And how do I conclude that this was produced by intelligent design? Is that a religious conclusion that has to be relegated to the Sunday school classroom? Excluded from the science classroom because it's intelligent design? Well, no, we know that that's design, especially when you have information. John loves Mary. That's not going to happen by itself, and we understand that. It's not a religious conclusion. We observe over and over again that information is produced by intellect and necessarily implies that. And so when we see information as opposed to lines that parallel, we can distinguish. When we look at the living world around us, that which was made, I think design is so obvious that people are without excuse. Look with me, for example, at the bacterial flagellum, the tail on the end of the bacteria. It's described in Nature 2017 as a rotary nanomotor that allows bacteria to propel themselves through fluids and across surfaces. A machine, and that term machine is used throughout the article to describe it, that self-assembles. It's an outboard motor on the back of a bacteria. It's an amazing motor that's exactly, in so many ways, like our electric motor. It has a rotor and a stator. It has O-rings. It has bushings, a U-joint, and a drive shaft. And if you have a stator but don't have the U-joint, that's not going to help. You've got to have all of these parts together, or none of them are worth anything. It revolves at 100,000 revolutions per minute, and that's astounding. It can reverse itself in a quarter turn. It has a network-controlled clutch and brakes. In all, we can identify 30 functional, coordinated parts, each one dependent on the other. You can't lead up to it by getting O-rings and then waiting till the rest of it comes along. You have to have all 30 functioning parts, or you've got nothing. Now think of that in connection with Darwin's comment in Origin of the Species. He said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Well, I see a breakdown. There's no way to get that naturally, gradually, accidentally without having all things together, that's not going to work that way, and I think we understand that. When we look at machines, we see all kinds, and they come as a result of intellect and design. Observation, which is the basis of science, tells us that machines are designed. And according to this article in Science, this was an amazing machine. And since we observe over and over again that machines are designed, then design is the scientific explanation. And people back up from that because they don't like where it leads. But that's where it inevitably leads. This is a machine that was designed. The more we learn, and we're learning more, just amazing information, almost every day. And here from just 2018, we have a description of yeast. It's supposed to be the very simplest organism we know. That was one of the goals, to study one completely that's so simple we can make it. But it's not simple at all. It's just getting the number of molecules in the cell was amazing. 210 trillion molecules. Darwin thought the simple cell was just protoplasm, just jelly. No, we've got 210 trillion molecules, but they're not just molecules piled into the cell. They're organized into machines. 42 million proteins are how these 210 trillion molecules are organized, and those proteins are called machines, and that is a perfect analogy. Like machines invented by humans is what the article in Science says. These protein assemblies contain highly coordinated moving parts. And so that's the simple cell. And these moving parts are absolutely astounding. Again and again, it's called a machine, spinning to and fro, actually 42 million machines, turning about various axes at not 100,000 revolutions per minute, but 1,000,000 rotations per second. This is an astounding machine. We don't have anything that we can make that even comes close. The simplest cell, the yeast, wow, that happened all by itself. Well, how do you account for that if you're a naturalist? Well, I think you deserve to know what the other side says. Michael Roos is one of the leading philosophers of science in the world. He's director of the History and Philosophy of Science Department, Florida State University, and often quoted in the creation-evolution controversy. He was interviewed by Ben Stein, where Ben Stein asked him to account for some of this complexity. We didn't know at the time this interview took place about yeast, by the way. But let's see what they have to say.
To the world of the cell.
Well, one popular theory is that it might have started off on the backs of crystals.
My crystal ball.
Molecules piggybacked on the back of crystals forming, and that this led to more and more complex. But of course, the nice thing about crystals is every now and then you get mistakes, mutations, and that this opens the way for natural selection.
But at one point there was not a living thing.
Yeah.
And then there was a living thing. How did that happen?
Well, this is I've just told you. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go from very simple to more and more complex to more and more complex.
I don't either, but I don't know how you get from mud to a living cell. That's my question.
Yes, well, I've told you.
I think it was on the back of crystals.
Try one more time.
On the backs of crystals.
On the backs of crystals is at least one hypothesis, yes.
So that's your theory, and you think that is more likely and less far-fetched than intelligent design?
I think it is.
Well, that takes a great deal of faith. And I think it's a blind faith that looks in one direction, refuses to look at the other. We could illustrate it with a scientist who's looking at rocks taken from afar Africa, and he sees a chip in the side of this rock and concludes that that was shaped. It must be a prehistoric tool, and so he ascribes this to intelligent design. And of course, a human designer is all right with him. But then he looks at a yeast cell with 42 million machines not just a chip in the side. Machines that have rotations, a million rotations per second, and he sees no intelligent design at all. I think that's just blindness. You've got blinders on. You look in one direction, you don't look in the other. It's obvious when you open your eyes and look. Even Richard Dawkins, often referred to as the Pope of Evolution, from Oxford, is acknowledging in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, describing the definition of biology as the appearance of things having been designed for a purpose. That's what biology is. Well, of course, he doesn't believe it was, but that's what it looks like, to the point that that's how he defines biology. Well, maybe it's what it looks like. Science is supposed to follow what we see. Francis Crick reveals the same kind of blind prejudice when he's reminding people that biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Now, it looks designed, but just remind yourself, keep your blinders on would be another way to say that, so that you only look in one direction. I don't think that's good science. But we're told in the classroom you can't talk about intelligent design. That has been removed, and there's no intelligence allowed in terms of explanation of origins. I think that's prejudicing the issue. I think we've demonstrated that both creation and evolution can be investigated scientifically. We see that with John Loves Mary. We see that with the arrowhead. I think we see the same thing, or even more so, when you look at the fly with ants on its wings, or when you look at the yeast cell with 42 million machines going at 1 million rotations per second. When you look at the bacterial flagellum, an outboard motor. Now, how do you account for this? I think this points to the fact that things that are made show that they were made by a creator. Or you can account for them by molecules on the backs of crystals. Does that really explain which is the more adequate explanation? I'll allow you to think of that. Think about that. Both creation and evolution can be investigated scientifically. Both of them have profound religious implications. Sometimes we're told evolution can be in the classroom because it's scientific. You can't have creation there because it's religious. And I think that's a very naive view. Both can be investigated scientifically. Both have profound religious implications. Let me illustrate, and I think we can allow Richard Dawkins to speak and to explain the religious implications of evolution.
Defining moment where you made a decision that you didn't believe in God, or?
Yes, I suppose I switched from Christian theism to some sort of deism round about the age of 14 or 15, and then switched to atheism round about the age of 15, 16.
And was there a particular point that, or something that you read, or an experience you had that sort of said, yeah, this is it, God doesn't exist?
Oh, well, by far the most important, I suppose, was understanding evolution. I think the evangelical Christians have really sort of got it right in a way in seeing evolution as the enemy, whereas the more, what should we say, sophisticated theologians who are quite happy to live with evolution, I think they're deluded. And I think the evangelicals have got it right in that there really is a deep incompatibility between evolution and Christianity, and I think I realized that at the age of about 16.
I think the obvious conclusion is, yes, both have very profound religious implications. We see that in the statement by Isaac Asimov, the famous atheist who says, I have faith, but he says, I have faith in nothing beyond the natural laws. And then he says, I have no evidence for this. It's simply what I have faith in, what I believe. There is so much faith involved in people who try to explain away the obvious design in the universe. It's amazing. The unbeliever believes that nothing created everything, that a big explosion produced the entire ordered universe, that molecules assemble and become living cells, and errors in information, mutations, produce even more information. That's astounding faith. It's unbelievable what an unbeliever has to believe in order to be an unbeliever. He believes that there was nothing, and then nothing happened to nothing until nothing magically exploded for no reason, creating everything, and then a bunch of everything magically rearranged itself for no reason into self-replicating bits, which turned into dinosaurs and then eventually into people. I don't have that much faith. That's blind faith. It's contrary to the evidence, and people are told that, and just like little robins, they open their mouth and swallow it whole. I think we need to be more critical and look at the evidence. The thing that really bothers me is the fact that our tax dollars almost exclusively support one view of origins, the religious propaganda of humanistic naturalism. I think propaganda is defined by one side excluding other sides, and I think that's unconstitutional and un-American. We need to look at all of the evidence. And some will say, well, but isn't everything else illegal? And the answer is no. We have Supreme Court authority. Notice the statement, again from Edwards versus Gwilliard, here from the majority opinion by Brennan. The Act does not grant teachers a flexibility they did not already possess. The reason he was overturning this and saying the law, balanced treatment law, was unconstitutional was because you already have that right, the right to supplant present science curriculum with presentation of theories besides evolution about the origin of life. Teaching a variety of scientific theories about origins of mankind to school children can be validly done with a clear secular intent of enhancing the effectiveness of science education. Not for the purpose of teaching religion, but for the purpose of looking at all of the evidence and seeing the best explanation. Validly done, according to the Supreme Court. Right after that decision was rendered, Stephen Gould, the famous evolutionist from Harvard, was asked about it. He says, no statute exists in any state to bar instruction in creation science. Could be taught before, it can be taught now. Some are under the mistaken delusion that it is illegal. It is not. But in spite of the propaganda, we see very encouraging signs. Here, earlier, in July of last year, Gallup conducted a poll regarding creation, evolution, intelligent design. 40% believe God created humans in their present form. 33% believe God created evolution, created man through evolution. 22% believed in naturalistic evolution, which is what's taught as propaganda in the schools. We're still winning, even though we're shut out from the schools, and the propaganda is overwhelming. Survey Monkey International conducted a poll in 2016, nationwide, United States, testing two propositions. Teachers and students should have the academic freedom to discuss both the scientific strengths and weaknesses of the theory of evolution. Well, 93% agree with that. It's impossible for policymakers and the public, or it is important for policymakers and the public to hear scientists with differing views. 94% agree. But those who are in control take opposite view of both of those. And they do so with vicious opposition. To give an illustration, notice Darwin, that is Richard Dawkins' methodology. He says, go beyond humorous ridicule, sharpen our barbs to a point where they really hurt. I think they're likely to be swayed by reason and logic and evidence. No, by a display of naked contempt. Nobody likes to be laughed at. Nobody wants to be the butt of contempt. This is not science, but that is what we see, and the methodology that's encouraged. Professor Myers, University of Minnesota, a leader in the opposition to creation science, calls us theocrats, faith healers, snake oil artists. I say blankety blank the polite words, careful rhetoric. It's time for scientists to break out the steel-toed boots, brass knuckles, get out there and hammer the lunatics and idiots. Now, this may work and does intimidate a lot of people, but it's not science, and it's not the way to proceed. What is creation science? It's looking at the evidence, seeing what the facts are, and seeing what the best explanation is. That's good science. Only looking at one side isn't. Interestingly, I agree with Darwin's view expressed in Origin of the Species when he says a fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of each question. Ironically, that's a pretty good description of creation science. Let's look at the evidence. Let's follow the facts. Go where the facts lead. But look at all of the facts. Don't just close your eyes. Look at this objectively. Refuse to look at that objectively. That's bad science. That's not what we want to be doing as any kind of a scientist, and the same errors we see in religion. Good science demands all of the evidence and being honest and with integrity evaluating the science. We're glad that you listened to us this morning, and I hope you will think